Did she take a wrong turn into a secretary seminar? A female recruit laughed as Emily Collins quietly stepped onto the FBI Academy's training field. Gray shirt, worn backpack, low-tied hair, no makeup, no noise. The FBI needs warriors, not preschool teachers, a tall male candidate said with a scoff, patting her shoulder as the rest of the group laughed along. During a tactical simulation, when Emily raised her voice to warn the team, the leader waved her off. Just sit there and don't disrupt the formation. No one knew. Just 3 days later, the woman they had dismissed would step down from a military helicopter in the suit of the President's special envoy of the United States. She stood at the edge of the training field that first morning with a calm, almost invisible presence. The other recruits wore sleek performance gear and carried brand new duffel bags embroidered with the logos of prestigious military units or top law enforcement academies. Emily's simple clothes made no impression: a light gray button-up shirt, khaki pants that had seen better days, and an old backpack. A few recruits looked her over with curiosity, but their interest quickly tilted to scorn once they noticed how quiet she was. They'd come here expecting to compete against the best ex-Marines, Ivy League graduates, advanced hackers brought in under special recruitment. Seeing a woman who appeared to have no specialized background triggered a wave of casual cruelty. A short but sharp-tongued woman wearing an FBI-branded windbreaker let out a loud snort. "That can't be the new standard, can it?" she asked a friend. Nearby, a bulky man with a shaved head, apparently proud of his Special Forces past, watched Emily as if she were a stray cat invading a guard dog kennel. She merely shifted her bag from one shoulder to the other, face impassive. The laughter grew louder, and a few of them exchanged high fives as if ridiculing her was some kind of bonding exercise. They were all called to line up, and an instructor, a gray-haired man with a clipped voice, read their names off a list. Each recruit stepped forward at the sound of their name, raising a hand or nodding to confirm they were present. When Emily's turn came, the instructor paused a half-second, flicked his eyes from the list to her face, then continued as if uncertain why she merited a second look. She acknowledged with a small nod, said nothing, and dropped back in line. The tall candidate who had patted her shoulder leaned toward his neighbor. "She's a ghost," he whispered loud enough for Emily to hear. "I bet she worked as a school secretary and thought it'd be fun to join the FBI. His friend grinned. "Give her a week, she'll be gone." Someone behind them muttered about how they didn't need soft misfits who'd never handled a weapon. Emily remained still, eyes forward. Within the hour, they were shepherded into a large training hangar for a physical evaluation. Rows of chin-up bars, tall walls for climbing, and a timed obstacle course waited. The recruits stood in clusters, each group forging alliances from shared backgrounds, a circle of ex-military guys bragging about deployments, a knot of Ivy League graduates discussing advanced degrees in criminology, a pair of famously skilled hackers who boasted about their infiltration feats. Emily stood alone, adjusting the old backpack slung around her shoulder. A tall woman with a severe ponytail brushed past her eyes, drifting down to Emily's plain attire, then letting out a faint laugh that reeked of condescension. "Someone like that probably gets pushed aside at the grocery store," she said to a friend, let alone making it into the FBI. They both laughed. Emily stared at the obstacle course, measuring it in a silent inward way. Her posture gave no clue whether the remarks affected her. The instructor signaled for them to begin the timed run. One by one, recruits scrambled up ropes, vaulted over barriers, and sprinted through a series of twisting lanes. The tall male candidate positioned himself near Emily in line. "Lots of people fail this on the first day," he said with a chuckle. "You should conserve your energy for the flight home." He smacked the back of her shoulder in mock camaraderie. She stepped forward without reacting, her eyes set on the first obstacle. The whistle blew. The tall recruit dashed off at full speed, arms pumping, showboating for anyone watching. Emily took a measured start, neither slow nor frantic. The group of ex-military men soared through the course, easily scaling walls and net climbs. A cluster of recruits from law enforcement families performed with varying degrees of skill. Every now and then, a head turned to check if Emily was lagging behind. She scaled a short wall with surprising ease, crawled under barbed wire faster than a few who had insulted her, and swung on the monkey bars with quiet determination. The tall candidate, once he had finished, stood off to the side, watching her, eager to see her stumble. When she cleared the final hurdle with only mild exertion, he forced a smirk. "Beginner's luck," he mumbled. The severe ponytailed woman shrugged. "Yeah, well, it's only day one. She'll trip up soon enough." Emily walked past them, sweat on her forehead, but no visible sign of triumph. By midday, they were ushered into an auditorium for the next briefing, advanced firearms training mandatory at the start of every new class. Recruits filed into rows of seats, the chatter buzzing with speculation over who had the best chance of passing the notoriously brutal selection process. Emily sat alone at the end of a row. The tall candidate and several others from the earlier group took seats behind her. "Secretary, can you believe that?" One whispered, not bothering to be subtle. "Public service. That's what she said, right? Maybe she sorted mail at a city office." Another voice cut in. "I'll bet she's never fired anything more powerful than a paintball gun." Emily's shoulders stiffened, but she turned no further than a single glance toward the speaker. Then she was still again. The lecture began. A stoic female instructor explained the difference between standard bureau firearms and specialized weaponry. She rattled off details about recoil velocity and advanced sighting systems. As she spoke, the group behind Emily kept up a low murmur, jokes about how Emily wouldn't know a Glock from a hole in the ground, or how she'd probably cry the first time a gun kicked back against her shoulder. A few seats away, a broad-shouldered recruit frowned at their hostility but said nothing. Emily quietly took notes in a small battered notebook. When the instructor asked for questions, Emily lifted her pen slightly but decided against speaking. The tall candidate snickered. "I guess she doesn't even know what to ask." The class moved to the range where each recruit was assigned a lane. At the far end, 2 hacker recruits were setting up, fiddling with the digital scoreboard that tracked hits. The air smelled of gun oil and powdered residue from thousands of rounds fired in previous sessions. Each booth had a paper silhouette target, a standard FBI model with a central ring for higher points. The tall candidate's eyes lit up as he watched Emily step into her booth. "Bet you $100 she hits the floor before she hits the target," he said to the man next to him, who smirked in agreement. She donned protective earmuffs, loaded a magazine, and raised the pistol. Her stance was efficient, no wasted movement, no trembling. The tall candidate rolled his eyes, sure she was just copying what she'd seen in movies. Instructors walked the line, checking posture. Emily's posture needed no correction. At the signal, the first volley erupted. A storm of gunfire cracked down the range, shells clinking on the concrete. The tall candidate fired quickly, grouped a decent cluster near the silhouette's torso. He stepped back, glancing sideways to gauge Emily's performance. After an orderly ceasefire, the targets were reeled in. Emily's silhouette showed a tight cluster near the heart, a skillful grouping that suggested countless hours of practice. The tall candidate masked his surprise with a forced laugh. "The angle must have been off," he muttered. "There's no way she's that good. Probably just luck." One of the instructors raised an eyebrow at Emily's target, scribbled a note on the clipboard, and continued down the line. They broke for lunch, a clamor of voices filling the cafeteria. Tables were arranged in a grid, many of them pushed together so recruits could congregate in their cliques. Emily, tray in hand, glanced around for an empty seat. She chose a lone table near the back, apparently content to remain solitary. A slender woman with short hair and an uncertain expression carried her tray toward Emily's table, hesitated, then turned around at the last second, joining a group she knew better. The tall candidate, perched with his friends at a center table, caught this moment and called out, "Yeah, keep that seat warm for the real agents." Snickers passed among them. A rumor started that Emily might be some bureaucratic attaché who'd used connections to get here. "That's the only explanation," an ex-cop recruit said, biting into his sandwich. "We all had to pass rigorous screening, but she acts like she's never been in a real field situation." The group nodded sagely as if this was a proven fact. Emily sipped water, ignoring the commotion, her gaze drifting to the digital clock overhead. A flicker in her eyes recalled a faint memory standing in a private corridor of a government building, glancing at a similar digital readout that counted down to a classified briefing. No one around her noticed that subtle shift in her expression. She finished her meal, placed the tray away, and walked out, old backpack slung over one shoulder. In the afternoon, they began a tactical field exercise. Recruits were grouped into squads to conduct a simulated hostage rescue. The chosen squad leader was a brash man who prided himself on real-world experience with local SWAT. He addressed the group, Emily, the tall candidate, the ex-cop, the ponytailed woman, and a few others, in a clipped tone. "All right, we'll move in from the north side, breach the door, neutralize threats. Everyone follow my orders." Collins, he didn't bother to hide his disdain. "You can tag along and observe, but if you come from public service, you might want to stick to paperwork. Don't interfere with professionals." The tall candidate snickered, patting Emily on the back with mocking encouragement. The ex-cop made a face as if to say, "I can't believe we have to drag her around." Emily didn't argue, simply nodded and fell in line behind them. They reached the simulated building, a structure fitted with pop-up targets and sound effects mimicking gunfire. The ponytailed woman asked about alternate entrances, noticing a side door. Emily spoke up softly, suggesting they position one pair at the flank for a coordinated entry. The SWAT experienced leader cut her off. We rush in together or we don't rush at all. Keep your suggestions to yourself. The group formed behind him, weapons loaded with paint rounds. Inside, instructors played the role of armed suspects. The moment the squad burst through the front door, chaos erupted. The lead instructor had set up a crossfire scenario that the squad leader never anticipated. Paint rounds pelted the group from multiple angles. Shouts and curses filled the space. The tall candidate took a direct hit on his vest. The ex-cop slipped on scattered debris, leaving him momentarily exposed. Emily pressed against a corner, scanning the chaotic environment. She spotted a route to flank the suspects, but the squad leader yelled that she should stay put. 2 more recruits took hits to the helmet, signifying lethal mistakes. The instructors triggered a smoke grenade, filling the room with thick clouds. The simulation ended in a blaring horn that indicated a failure. They regrouped outside, paint stains across their gear. The squad leader glared at Emily. "You didn't contribute anything but dampening morale," he snapped, as though her mere presence had doomed the operation. The tall candidate joined in. "If she'd been more decisive, we might not have stumbled. Or maybe we just had to carry dead weight." Their words overflowed with resentment, refusing to see that the plan itself was flawed. An instructor approached, shaking her head. "That was reckless," she said to the squad. "No coordination, no listening to potential alternatives." Then her gaze fell on Emily. "But did you really think you're qualified to be here? You barely engaged. You just stood off to the side, correct?" Emily inclined her head slightly, offering no excuse. The tall candidate gave a smug grin, as if the final authority had spoken. They filed away, leaving Emily standing in the swirling smoke that lingered around the training structure. Evening rolled around with a tension that felt almost tangible. The recruits returned to their dorm rooms, sweat-soaked, paint-stained, exhausted. Conversations echoed in the corridors. Some boasted about partial successes, others complained about the brutal tempo of the training. A few singled out Emily's presence as the biggest mystery. The ponytailed woman paced the hallway, telling a friend about how incompetent Emily looked in the face of a real operation. "This place demands steel nerves, but all she does is stand there like she's checking library books." The ex-cop claimed he'd had enough, muttering she either quits or she gets cut. "There's no future for her here." Emily's door remained closed. Through the narrow gap beneath it, lights shone deep into the night. A quiet hush enveloped that end of the hall. Someone who passed by saw her silhouette seated at a small desk, hunched over what looked like training manuals. The next morning, the humiliations continued in subtler ways. During warm-ups, the tall candidate jogged too close to Emily, nudging her off stride. When she stumbled back into position, he called out, "Gotta keep up, Ms. Preschool." Another recruit snorted. "Don't blow a gasket trying." The instructor in charge either didn't notice or chose not to intervene, preoccupied with reading from a clipboard. The negativity grew more blatant at the next simulation, a combined test of physical endurance and mental puzzle solving. At one station, recruits had to decode a scrambled message under time pressure. Emily arrived just behind the ex-cop and ponytailed woman. They blocked her view of the puzzle, snickering. She edged around them, quietly scanning the pieces. The ex-cop gave her a hard stare. "Don't expect me to help. You should figure this out on your own if you're so qualified." She gathered the tiles, arranged them methodically, forming the required phrase. Before the ex-cop realized what was happening, she stood up, leaving him grappling with the solution. By the time the tall candidate arrived, Emily was already moving to the next station. He scowled, refusing to believe she'd handled it more efficiently. He muttered something about lucky guesses and raced on, determined to outperform her in the more physical tasks. But at the rope climb, she maintained a steady rhythm, reaching the top about the same time as the ex-cop. He shot her a glare, and she dropped back to the ground, calm as ever. They posted preliminary scores that afternoon. The digital leaderboard displayed a list of trainee names arranged by combined points for physical performance, mental agility, and marksmanship. The tall candidate hovered around the middle. The ex-cop was just below him, the ponytailed woman a bit further down. Emily's name unexpectedly rested near the top quarter of the list. A hush of disbelief rippled through the room when they saw her rank. The tall candidate cursed under his breath. "That can't be right. The system must be glitching." The ex-cop said, "There's no way. She's not that good." The ponytailed woman tried to laugh it off. In the real world, she'd crumble. "These stats mean nothing. But a few recruits who'd witnessed her quiet competence began to wonder if they'd misjudged her. One or two even exchanged guilty looks, recalling the jibes they'd thrown her way. Emily walked by, glanced at the board for less than a second, and moved on, unresponsive to the tension that thickened around her name. On day 3, the schedule demanded a final large-scale simulation, a hostage scenario with multiple rooms, timed infiltration, and a heavy emphasis on team coordination. The academy had set up a sprawling compound dotted with mock suspects and booby traps. Instructors would judge not just accuracy but synergy, how well recruits communicated, backed each other up, and adapted to unexpected threats. The tall candidate, the ex-cop, the ponytailed woman, and a handful of others ended up in the main assault team. Emily was assigned to observe their flank with 2 lesser-known recruits. The team leader, once again the brash SWAT veteran, outlined a risky plan. Emily ventured a suggestion from the side, calm and to the point. If you rush that corridor without checking the corners, the hostages could be caught in the crossfire. He dismissed her with a wave. Just stay behind us, all right? The FBI needs real warriors. The tall candidate smirked in agreement. We gotta move fast, not stand around analyzing. The group advanced. Emily watched them fan out, stepping into positions that left blind angles uncovered. She offered a low-voiced warning to the 2 recruits next to her, but they simply shrugged, glancing anxiously at the group leader for approval. They pushed through the first door. The instructors playing suspects popped out from side passages, unleashing volleys of paint rounds. The tall candidate took 2 hits to his protective vest, cursing. The ex-cop tried to return fire but got flanked. The ponytailed woman advanced too far and ended up pinned behind a flimsy barrier. A shrill alarm indicated a hostage injured in the crossfire. The chaos spiraled. The squad ended up huddling behind makeshift cover with minimal communication. Emily stayed near the rear exit, eyes scanning for an approach that might salvage the scenario. The team leader barked at her to stay put, insisting they'd handle it. The result was predictable. The instructors ended the simulation, prematurely signaling a major failure. When the battered, paint-splattered recruits regrouped, the leader zeroed in on Emily. "You were useless," he snapped, ignoring the fact that she'd tried to warn him. The tall candidate tore off his helmet, pointing at Emily. "She jinxed us, or she stood around doing nothing. One or the other." The ex-cop joined in, out of breath and furious. "She's not cut out for this." At the debrief, an academy official stood before them, a woman in her 50s, face etched with a permanent line of disappointment. It wasn't just the meltdown in tactics, she said, scanning their faces. It was the attitude. Disorganized, arrogant, ignoring potential input. Where do you expect to go in a real crisis if you can't manage a simulation? Her stern gaze halted on Emily, who remained at the edge of the group. "And you, Collins? Did you think you were qualified to be here?" A hush enveloped the room, the tension so thick that some recruits held their breath. Emily's posture revealed no anger, no shame, just a poised stillness. The official exhaled sharply and waved them off. "Get rest. Tomorrow we'll finalize evaluations." The tall candidate and his circle walked past Emily with sneers. "Good luck passing," the ponytailed woman spat. "You're a disgrace to the program." That night, the dorm building hummed with restless energy. Rumors traveled quickly the top brass might come to observe how the recruits had performed overall. Perhaps they'd cut half the class. Some said a special government official was visiting to tighten budget concerns. The tall candidate joked, "They'll see how incompetent our so-called public servant is and toss her out first." The ex-cop nodded. "At least that'll clear the air around here." A few recruits seemed unsettled by the cruelty, but no one challenged them. Morning arrived with an unexpected spectacle. Black SUVs with tinted windows lined the academy's driveway. Helicopters circled overhead, then landed on the open field that only days before had hosted warm-up exercises. Agents in dark suits and earpieces fanned out, forming a perimeter. The lead instructor ordered every recruit to stand in formation. Murmurs erupted. "Is this for real?" "Secret Service." "Homeland Security." "Are we under threat?" The tall candidate wiped nervous sweat from his forehead. The ex-cop squinted, scanning the uniforms. The ponytailed woman stood rigid, uncertain. Emily stepped into formation with the same unassuming calm, her old backpack nowhere in sight this time. A hush fell as a high-ranking figure from the Department of Homeland Security marched forward, flanked by Secret Service details. The official carried a sealed folder. In a crisp voice, he announced that these recruits would receive new orders from the highest levels of government. No one moved or spoke. Then, in front of everyone, the official read from the folder. His tone was solemn as he introduced the president's highest special envoy, an undercover operative assigned to evaluate the Academy's standards and the moral fiber of its future agents. The crowd glanced around, searching for some important-looking official to step from the SUVs. The official's gaze fell on Emily. He asked her to come forward, addressing her as Mrs. Collins. A ripple of disbelief coursed through the ranks. A few recruits, especially the tall candidate, the ponytailed woman, the ex-cop, and the SWAT leader, looked thunderstruck. Emily stepped out of line, walking with measured grace to join the official. He proceeded to list her achievements: top-secret overseas missions, protective details for the president during high-risk trips, and a National Medal of Honor. Gasps rose from the recruits who had assumed she was a nobody. The official underscored her role in assessing not just training standards but also the interpersonal dynamics that define the FBI's core values. The yard was so quiet that even the helicopter rotors seemed distant. Those who had ridiculed Emily felt the floor drop beneath them. The tall candidate's face turned ashen, remembering every mocking phrase he'd used. The ex-cop looked like he'd swallowed a bitter pill, jaw twitching. The ponytailed woman's eyes watered, and she tried to avert her gaze as if not wanting to accept this reality. The SWAT leader stared at Emily, a slow flush creeping up his neck. Emily faced the sea of recruits, her voice calm but resonant. She spoke of how the FBI needed more than physical prowess or arrogance. She said that in real missions, the quiet, overlooked individual might be the strongest asset, while those puffed up with pride might break under pressure. Each sentence struck the hearts of those who remembered belittling her. By the time she finished, even the cocksure tall candidate lowered his head. The Department of Homeland Security official resumed control of the assembly, announcing that Emily's personal evaluations would now inform the final results. The tall candidate and several others who had led the bullying were called forward first. Their conduct had shown disrespect, arrogance, and the inability to foster team cohesion, the official explained. Effective immediately, they were dismissed from the program. The tall candidate tried to argue that he'd only been joking, but no one entertained his excuses. The ex-cop turned red, stammering about how he'd done well on the obstacle courses, only to hear that personal attitude mattered as much as physical skill. The ponytailed woman stood on shaky legs, tears sliding down her cheeks as the official read a note that summarized her repeated incidents of harassment toward Emily. Another handful of recruits who joined in the hostility received their dismissal notices. They slunk away, humiliated families, disappointed careers cut short. The hush was painful, broken only by the whir of the helicopter overhead. Others, some who had apologized to Emily or refrained from mocking her, found themselves not just spared but praised for showing the qualities the FBI needed: humility, collaboration, moral decency. They were invited to remain in a specialized training track under the guidance of Ms. Collins. A swirl of gratitude and shock swept the group as they realized how close they'd come to following the bully's lead. Emily quietly stepped aside, letting the official finalize the administrative details. The tall candidate's shoulders slumped, was escorted out. He glanced at Emily one last time, his expression torn between anger and regret. The ex-cop, too, paused before leaving, as if wanting to speak but lacking the words. Then they were gone. Within the hour, the courtyard cleared of onlookers. The specialized group remained unsure how to proceed in the face of such a revelation. Emily, now dressed in a crisp suit jacket she'd retrieved from one of the black SUVs, addressed them. Her tone was neither smug nor vengeful. She spoke of the mission behind law enforcement: genuine service to the country, an oath to protect citizens regardless of rank or background, and a duty to treat teammates with respect. Some recruits hung on every word, humbled. Others struggled with shame but stayed silent. The flash of memory passed through Emily's eyes, standing behind the president at a global summit, scanning for threats, quietly ensuring everyone's safety. She turned that same steady gaze on these recruits, telling them that badges alone didn't confer honor. It was how they acted in moments of challenge that mattered. An uneasy relief settled over those who remained. They asked no direct questions about her personal past, sensing she wouldn't elaborate much. Instead, they listened with a new sense of awe, realizing that for days they had been tested by someone with the president's full trust. In the days that followed, the newly trimmed class continued their training under a different atmosphere. Gone were the jeers and petty humiliations. The instructors, many of whom had been in the dark about Emily's identity, adopted a more careful approach to oversight. The official from Homeland Security visited each station, verifying that a culture of respect was enforced. Emily herself led small group discussions on tactical scenarios. Recruits who once would have dismissed her suggestions now listened intently, adjusting their strategies in real time. When one or two tried to slip back into sarcasm, a single glance from her was enough to remind them how quickly fortunes could turn. A hush of transformation spread across the academy. Future drills showed better coordination, quieter forms of leadership, and a willingness to accept input from any team member regardless of background. Many of the recruits who had scorned Emily discovered that their own families or references heard about the fiasco. Some faced phone calls of disappointment sponsors pulling away or scorn from local precincts that refused to welcome them back. Meanwhile, a smaller group who had either treated Emily neutrally or offered her basic courtesy found themselves singled out for advanced mentorship. She took them through high-level discussions of intelligence protocols, revealed glimpses of how protective details on foreign soil actually function, and underscored the real meaning of service. Their eyes shone with a sense of purpose they'd lacked before. No one tried to pander to her with flattery. It was clear she didn't care for overt praise. The old backpack and gray shirt sometimes reappeared as though she hadn't fully shed the undercover persona. But the respect in people's eyes was tangible, a far cry from the dismissive contempt they'd shown earlier. Once the academy wrapped up its final evaluations, a brief ceremony was held in a modest gym where they usually practiced hand-to-hand techniques. Emily stood at the front, observing as the lead instructor praised the newly minted recruits who passed under her watch. One by one, they received official letters confirming their acceptance into advanced FBI postings. The hush in the room spoke volumes about the transformation that had taken place. Emily spoke no lengthy speeches, but the instructor read a prepared statement that highlighted her unique role and singled out her unwavering dedication to upholding the Bureau's values. The recruits, some of whom had begun the program with inflated egos, understood now that true strength meant humility. When the ceremony ended, Emily shook hands with each passing graduate. They looked her in the eye, grateful not just for the chance to remain in the academy, but for the lessons in character that had altered them forever. As the day wound down, black SUVs waited outside again, ready to transport Emily back to her next assignment. A hush followed her steps when she walked through the corridors. She paused at a glass case holding the photos of past cohorts, her reflection mingling with the images. A faint memory glimmered in her eyes, standing behind bulletproof glass in a foreign embassy, awaiting the arrival of a key official. She blinked, letting the recollection subside. A couple of recruits who remained approached, unsure if they could speak. One mustered the courage to say they appreciated her fairness and regretted they hadn't spoken up sooner against the bullying. She inclined her head, a sign of quiet acceptance. Then she headed outside the door, swinging shut behind her. The waiting official from Homeland Security greeted her with a respectful nod, and within minutes a helicopter's blades churned the air, lifting her away from the campus she had changed so profoundly. Stories of Emily Collins, the quiet public servant who turned out to be the president's highest envoy, echoed through the academy's hallways for many classes to come. A hush fell whenever her name was mentioned, tinged with both awe and a sense of caution. People realized that cruelty, arrogance, and shallow judgments could wreck promising careers, while integrity, respect, and silent strength could move mountains. Those who once prided themselves on boasting or belittling now spoke more carefully, recalling how a single person's unassuming presence had held more power than all their combined bravado. The simple truth she embodied remained a whispered legend that the greatest authority often comes from humility. Maybe that's the lesson the president hoped would take root in the next generation of agents. Never judge by appearances. Never assume quiet means weak. And never forget that the ultimate measure of a law enforcement officer lies in character, not showmanship. She never changed her calm tone or her steady gaze, but she changed them. She never scolded them or raised her voice, but she left them humbled. She carried her old backpack, wore that gray shirt, endured their scorn, and then stepped off a helicopter as the president's envoy. Her story reminds us that appearances are only the dust on a surface, and true power often rests in silence. If her quiet resolve has reached a hidden corner of your heart, if it stirs you to see your own strength unspoken, take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Even the smallest gesture of recognition can spark a transformation that words alone cannot capture. May her example guide us toward a deeper sense of justice, honesty, and the courage to stand tall in who we truly are.